is Dipak Nadkarni. I'm a Navy physician. I've been in over 20 years. I'm a captain. My wife, who is back there, can you wave, Lorraine? She's near the back there, is also a Navy physician, and we've been in the Navy for over 20 years. And we are both family practice. We've been all over the world to do this. And if you asked me a few years ago, would I be up here in my testimony, would I be up in front of a church in my testimony, I would say probably not. But things do change in your life. And what I want to do is basically sort of connect dots over several years to show how the Lord has worked in our life, and how I became a Christian, and also how some of the other things have happened. First of all, I guess I'm just going to go back 20 years to start this one here. The question is, does the Lord put somebody in your path at the right time to turn your life around? And in my case, the answer was yes. We were starting medical school down in Miami. Interestingly enough, I'm wearing Carolina blue, but I'm a Duke graduate. But anyway, we met in medical school. I won't go into the details of how we met, but we met, and my wife was a born-again Christian at that time. In our second year of medical school, she asked me what was my faith, and I grew up as a Hindu, but mostly I was agnostic, I guess you could say. People would always, in my family, as I've said to some people, there are many different faiths. There's Hindu, there's Christian, there's Jewish, there's Muslim, and so there's a whole lot of different faiths. Actually, that whole group is now at a 90th birthday party that we decided that we wouldn't go to. We weren't going to go to it anyway, but this is a perfect time while they're enjoying theirs. So my entire family came to town on Friday, and they weren't able to be here today, but I felt the testimony was more important than being there. So, and I think they will when they see this. How I became a Christian. In our second year of medical school, my wife said to me, she goes, we're getting a little more serious, and I said, I understand. She goes, but I can't marry somebody who's not a Christian. And I said, understood. And I said, well, then I'm going to accept Christ. At that time, I didn't realize. At that time, I didn't realize that there was more to it than that. As I went off to officer school in the Navy, I actually took the Bible with me. It was at the end of my second year. She was in the Navy already, and she had a 4-year scholarship to medical school, and that's how she was going to pay her, and we would pay our way back. People do it in ROTC. People do it in a lot of different ways. And after I became a Christian, then I basically took the Bible with me, and it helped me considerably during officer training. So I got a chance to read predominantly the New Testament at that time. So the question was, how did each of us join the Navy? My wife actually originally was going to join the Army. Her dad was in the Army previous to that, but she wanted to be by water. So, of course, the Navy and the Marine Corps, and we're one group, and other Marines here also. We're all one group, and so she called up the Navy, and her application she'd already been accepted in medical school, and her application was already with the Navy. And they said, she said, well, you have 72 hours to tell me if I'm going to be in the Navy or not. If not, I'm going to say yes to the Army, who's already accepted me as a member of the Army. So they hustled pretty quickly to get her in front of them, and within the 72 hours, they had accepted her into the Navy program. They probably would have later, but you're never quite sure. So that's why we're not in the Army, and that's why I'm in the Navy. I said, well, I better either join the Navy or I'm going to follow you around as a civilian. And little did I know it, I'd have over 20 years of absolutely wonderful life in the Navy, or that we would. We've met 25 years ago. We got married 24 years ago. We got married 20 years ago. Our 20th anniversary was just this past May. I will say there are a lot of ups and downs, not in just a relationship. Our relationship has been very, very strong, but there are a lot of curveballs that are thrown to you. So you'd say, well, gee, gosh, you're a physician, you're a family physician, you've got over 20 years in the Navy, you've got, you're probably making some money, which we make money, and it's not quite the same as working in the civilian world, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. So what problems or what concerns could you possibly have? You're about to find out. Throughout the Navy, our career, which started in probably in 89 or 90, we've traveled throughout the world. We've been to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. We've been to Fort Gordon, Georgia. We've been to Parris Island, where they train Marines. And I was a senior medical officer there. We've traveled to Hawaii, traveled to Japan. My wife has been in the Middle East. I've been to Sri Lanka. And then we were here in D.C. When I was in Japan a few years ago, and some of you know that an event sort of happened to me when I was in Japan. My wife was deployed, and we had a change of command. And I bless my commanding officer who's there, and I've actually forgiven him for quite a lot of stuff at that time. And I wondered why the Lord had failed me temporarily. I'll give you a little bit about the background of the story. We had a change of command, and before the change of command, my old CO, my former CO, COs change, commanding officers change about every 2 years. They have a lot of people under them who are leaders as you get higher up in rank. And I was made a director for medical services, which included psychiatry, ER, family practice, pediatrics, everything that was non-surgical. My CO, before the new CO came in, invited me to his office, so I figured I was either in trouble or something good was going to happen. And he called me down, he goes, Dipak, I'm just going to sit you down here and I'm going to say there's several people who want this job, but technically this is an interview, but I'm going to give you this position as a director of medical services. I've seen how you've done as a department head in family practice. I've seen all the work that you've done, and for that I was grateful. Things don't quite turn out the way that you expected, so I expected to work with about 200 people or so. I expected to be able to run a department in a very tight situation when we have 2 wars going on, and a lot of us deploying at the time. And it was very, very difficult. So our commanding officer changed. This was in 2008. My wife was deployed. I knew my new commanding officer from a previous command. And over the course of time, people said, well, what kind of a person is he? And I didn't want to jinx us. So I said, you'll see. And over the course of 18 months, I had gone from being probably close to the weight that I am now, in the 170s or whatever, down to about 140. In other words, I had lost enough weight during that time under stress. He threatened to relieve me or fire me from my job, not in the Navy, but my job probably about every other week. It wasn't that I was doing anything wrong. He just wanted to make sure I didn't do anything wrong. And I took about 80 or 90% of his brunt of his anger, and it was tough. So I wondered why the Lord had sort of left me there in a very, very, very difficult situation. One night, after my wife had returned from her deployment, in November of 2011, we were about 6 or 7 months away from actually going to Italy. We were supposed to be in Italy in 2010. I basically was under an incredible amount of stress one night. And so much stress that I was antsy. I felt depressed, felt anxious, felt a lot of stuff. And during the course of the evening, my wife could see that I had changed. In fact, one of my officers of the day said, Doc, you need to go home and you need to get a glass of wine or something because you need to come down from wherever you are right now. So at that point, I said, Lorraine, I need to go to the emergency room. I said, I'm having not quite a breakdown, but I'm having a thing where I think my life is about to change. And she said, okay, but she goes, you do understand that by going there, the command's going to understand that what's going on, you're probably going to lose your position. And I thought to myself, well, I'm probably going to lose promotion. I'm going to lose a lot of stuff to do that. But I said, I need to go. This is where I need to be. So I did, and I was evaluated there, and one of my friends was there who assisted me, and I won't go into all the details about that, but suffice it to say that that very day, that very night, as my commanding officer and my executive officer, second in charge, asked me that day and the next day when they called me at home, because they had heard that I had said I'm stepping down, which if you understand myself or my wife, we don't easily step down from any kind of situation, not as naval officers and not as physicians. So I said, yes, I'm going to step down in November 2000, and I said 2011, but November 2009, I'm stepping down from this position. So I went back to being a family physician. I ran an ER, I ran a clinic, and I was about as happy as I could be for my last 6 months at the command. The interesting thing about it was that I recovered pretty quickly, probably over about 2 or 3, maybe 4 weeks. I recovered very quickly, which showed what stress really does to you. So if you're under a lot of stress, what you got to figure out is what will make your stress last. Even at that time, it's interesting, I didn't really pray to God. We prayed, myself and my wife, since we're family physicians, we usually don't run ERs. We usually run clinics and admit people to the hospital, discharge people from the hospital. But the most important thing is that we were able to pray each time we went into the ER that God would give us the strength to be able to make decisions on difficult cases, which there were some incredibly difficult cases. And people would be there when I needed them, nurses, other physicians, or whatever. The Lord never let me down on that, never, not once, nor my wife. Well, anyway, we're now in November 2009. I was supposed to give up my position in April, but basically I stepped down from that position. Situation adversely affected my health, my evaluation for promotion, my award when I left, where my CEO basically said there's no way in heck I'm going to send this award to California to be signed by our senior admiral there to do that, and ultimately affected my promotion initially, because when the list comes out, and it's a very competitive list, in 2010 May, I was probably at my lowest point in terms of all the stuff happening, and I said, you know what, this is just too much, and my name wasn't on the list. And I said, the people that worked for me, their names were on the list. So I said, I must be doing something right, because the people I trained are on the list. So I said, well, God, I have to leave this in your hands. And I was about to find out a lot. Originally, I said we were supposed to move from Japan to Italy. It would have been our third consecutive overseas move. We prefer to be overseas. You can always come back to the States, but if you're going to be in the military, you might as well be overseas. About 90 days before we were ready to leave, they said the admiral, one of our senior vice admirals at BUPERS, which is the Bureau of Personnel, basically said, we are going to transfer your orders. You're no longer going to Italy. And we had actually stayed an extra year in Japan and sort of worked. Most people say Navy or the military puts you where they want to, and under many circumstances, but there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that goes on to get you where you need to go. And you just have to know how you work the system a little bit. So I wasn't promoted, no award that I could think of. And you say, well, these are just petty things. These are just simple things. But they sort of went to my heart. So they said, we're going to move you back to the United States because we want you to touch ground and have one tour. Then we'll send you back overseas again after you finish a 3-year tour, which ends this month. So our move went, they said, you want East Coast or West Coast? And they were going to give us at least that much. My wife says, well, I'd like to do East Coast. She goes, I want a job at Quantico as being the regimental surgeon for the Wounded Warrior program for the Marine Corps for the war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And she was interviewed and was accepted for the job, which I had no doubt that she would get. And I said, well, I would like to interview up at the Physical Evaluation Board. And this is a board that meets and determines the fitness or unfitness of Navy and Marine Corps to stay in the military, either because of illness, injury, loss of a limb, or whatever. We make decisions. There are about 14 of us in there, both medical doctors and line officers, the guys that fly the planes and things like that. And we make the decisions for the entire Navy. So actually, we work for the Secretary of the Navy. Rarely have we ever PCS together, a permanent change of station, moving from one place to another. What's interesting is one of us, and it was usually my wife who was left behind, and I went on ahead, usually a few months, and then she would catch up because both commands, gaining command and the command that was losing us, said, we need at least one of you. So I said, I'll go on ahead, especially when we're going to Hawaii. I said, I'm going to go ahead and go to Hawaii, and well, I'll just see you when you get there. It sounds cruel, but it wasn't. I had to have one foot on the ground in Hawaii, otherwise the risk of losing orders, which was a phenomenal place if you've been to Hawaii, to actually live there. So we ended up going from Japan. Instead of Italy, we ended up here in D.C. So I said, well, Lord, it's not exactly the ideal place that I want to be, but somehow you've guided us here into this area. So I don't know why. We came here in June of 2010, and we had signed a contract to rent a house. And as we were leaving to go back to Japan for PCSing here, the people called us and basically said, as we were going back, President Obama is calling one of the generals back from, and you may have read this in the paper a few years ago, so calling one of the generals back from Afghanistan. And we said, well, okay. We went back to Japan, and our house that we're going to rent was his house. They wrote a letter to us and apologizing that the circumstances had changed as he was relieved of command, which does happen in the military sometimes. And so we said, well, we're going to just have to do something in the 5 minutes for 5 days that we have when we PCS in August. And I said, we could live in a hotel for a while, and we'll go ahead and do that. So we came to D.C. in August. We made very good friends with our realtor before, and we went around, couldn't really find anything. We wanted to live sort of in Alexandria, close to D.C., not quite as close to Quantico, but the ride, at least to Quantico, would be easier. Couldn't find anything. It was very, very difficult. On a Sunday morning, we were starting work Monday. On a Sunday morning, I was driving around, as I always did. I was on Duke Street. If you guys know Alexandria, there's King Prince Duke. And on Duke Street, I noticed a sign, just a couple of things from the end of the street, which is South Henry and Patrick, would become US 1, and it said, for rent. I said, wow, this is amazing. This was about 9 o'clock in the morning. And I said, I think that house was for sale, so maybe they couldn't sell it, so now they're going to rent it. I was wrong. They had sold it. They put the wrong sign up. They put the sign for rent as opposed to being sold. So I went in there and I said, well, do you think these people are they going to live here? And they go, no, they're considering renting. And I said, well, we're the only ones here because by that afternoon, the for rent sign was gone and the sold sign was on there. So we ended up getting that house. We had to wait a couple of weeks, but we were able to get that house. People came to celebrate my birthday and some other birthdays in August. And I noticed that my wife, when she and I would talk at least routinely because we don't always work at the same command. We could work 20, 30, 50 miles apart, trying to live in between. And I noticed she hadn't called me in each day that she was at work. It was sort of unusual. And then so I called her each day, and I said, are you okay? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I'm just so busy, I just can't eat, or whatever. I said, well, I know you're busy, but I know that the military does allow us to eat. So it didn't make sense to me. So I'll still remember this Saturday. I think it was the 27th of August, 2010. We ended up, she needed to take some stuff down to Quantico, so we did that. And she was sort of sitting there, and I said, is there anything wrong? And she says no, because she was very, very quiet in the car. And usually we're always conversing. We're very open with each other. And the worst was yet to come. We went down there, and as I looked through the window, it was almost like there was a halo around her. And I said, well, let's go ahead and take your stuff in, and then we'll come back. I remember we went out to eat at one of the restaurants that night, and about 10 or 11 o'clock, I felt that as we went to bed, I felt the sheets kicking. And I said, can you not get comfortable, Lorraine? No answer. I said, are you uncomfortable? And still kicking the sheets a little bit. Her arms were moving a little bit. And so I turned on the light, and even if you're a physician and in your own family, if your wife is having a seizure, literally, as you move to a new command or whatever, I really didn't know. We didn't know anybody. We had barely been here for a couple of weeks. I had to finally convince her. It took an hour and a half. The hospital, Alexandria Nova, said, well, why did it take you so long to get in here after her seizure? Because her seizure stopped, and I drove her there. I said, because she's a doctor. That's why. We're the worst patients. So I said to myself, well, what are the chances that somebody who's older would have a spontaneous seizure? You see them in children. And when they did a CT of her head, they found a brain tumor. And they said, or they found an area of concern on her left side. Left side controls speech, controls a lot of stuff. So they said, we need to send you to Walter Reed, which I had no idea where it was. At that time, it was on Georgia Avenue. Now it's up with Bethesda and NIH. And I said, boy, this is really rough. So they went ahead and they did more testing on her, and they said, we do believe it's a cancer. And they said, we're going to do surgery. Do you want to do a biopsy of it, or do you want the whole thing out? And so my wife says, I want the whole thing out, and I want it done today, which they couldn't exactly do that day because they had to do more testing. But within 3 days, they had done their testing. While I was there, I just emailed everybody I knew, first name, last name, at navy.mil, hoping that one person would at least call me back from not thinking that I was, UA or AWOL or whatever, especially as a senior officer. And they called me back, and one of the orthopedic surgeons who was in almost 30 years called me back, and he goes, Dipak, I want you to do something. He says, I know you don't know that place, but I want to introduce you to a physician that I want you to find, a neurosurgeon I want you to find. I won't mention his name. It's Dr. C. He's a lieutenant colonel, a brilliant neurosurgeon who also has a dual appointment at NIH across the street. So I said, well, I don't know who's coming, but I know they're coming here soon because now my wife's a patient, and this is what we do. We round. When you're in the hospital, decide if you're going to stay or go. So they came in, and lo and behold, of all the neurosurgeons, there were several, he goes, my name is Dr. C, and I'm going to be your doctor here. I said, oh, thank God. It worked out there. So on September 1st, 2010, they removed a tumor. So if you ask what was the size of the tumor that would not give you any sort of symptoms until a seizure, I would say if you think of a Twinkie and you sort of puff it out, that would be probably what the size of the tumor is. So it was large. It was a very large tumor. It was sitting sort of on the top of her brain, so it was easy to get to overall. And then we got the diagnosis. And the diagnosis was glioblastoma multiforme. I don't expect you to know that. Stage 4. So those of you who've had cancer or had family members, staging goes from 1 to 4. 4 is never good. So I said to myself, well, God, you brought us here. There must be a reason for it. And that soon became apparent in the fact that if we were in Italy, we would still have to move from Italy to come back to the States, and it would have been a real hassle to do that. So he brought us to where we needed to be, literally days before all this happened. When I was at my lowest point, if you didn't think my other points were low, when I was at my lowest point was a couple months after surgery. And I said, God, I still don't understand what you have in mind for us, but I know that you'll come through for us. I was getting out of the shower, and a little voice said to me, do you believe? And I said, I didn't say anything. I just said, oh, yes. I went to the mirror, and I looked at the mirror, and very loud in my voice, it says, do you believe? And I said, well, I figured there was nobody else in the room but me. I said, well, this must be God. So I said, yeah, yes, Lord, I do believe in you. That was it. That's what he wanted to know. If I thought that no matter what the diagnosis was, that he could overcome that diagnosis. That he could actually overcome that. That was a very simple thing. He says, do you believe? I don't care what the doctors say. I don't care what you thought you believed. I don't care what your family says or anybody else says, because we were getting a lot of condolences at that time, and we wish you well kind of letters and emails and cards. So basically they asked, and I said yes. So what I committed to was that I believed that he would take care of us. My wife, after that, came back pretty quickly after the surgery. She had surgery. Then she was over at NIH. Most of you know that, National Institute of Health, where people from all over the world come in. And most of the research that you see that you hear on TV, phase clinical trials, things like that, a lot of it happens there. And they're associated with a lot of universities. So they were going to put her in a trial, a medicine that they knew that worked to some extent, and another medicine which they thought would be an accelerator. But her labs and all that after surgery were so out of whack that she couldn't be part of that study, so we had to go with the original medicine to do that. So we thought we'd be going back to Walter Reed and having our radiation and all that. But they said, you've been so good and so nice about going through all the testing with us and all that. We're going to keep you here at NIH if you'd like to. You can still go to see your neurosurgeon, but would you like to stay with us? And I said, sure. That sounds like a good idea. And then we met the neuro-oncologist, one of the neuro-oncologists, Dr. Fine, who's probably number one in the world, who was working there. And he actually said to us, he goes, I look at this and I say, some people are going to give you some very, very bad news, but I'm here to say that your outcome is going to depend on a lot of variables, including your faith. And I said, I know that because I was just asked a few days ago about my faith. So my wife actually became disease-free. We have MRIs. We still do. From 2010, December, until December, January 2012, 2013, just 8 months ago. All of the things looked good. She was on medicines periodically and basically was just following up, had finished her things. And she was actually back on active duty. She was back on full-time active duty, in fact. But she couldn't, because of seizures, she couldn't actually drive down to Quantico. So I said, well, why don't you come up and work with me and ask if they can do a TAD, temporary active duty, come on up to where I work. And so we had to get both commands to agree, which they did. And they liked her so much at the place that I worked, they said, do you want to stay here? She had been there 3 months, and she goes, well, I have to go back to my other job to do that, so there's really not a position for me. They said, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. So when you work for the top, things happen. And she started working there, and we worked there together for 2 years until her recurrence in 2013. I always believe that the Lord picked me up over several months from the time that I was really in Japan to the time that I didn't get promoted to the time that we were right on time here in Washington, D.C., that he gave me those 8 or 9 months to recuperate, because there was no way in the world I could have taken care of my wife in the position I was in when I talked back when I was in the ER. Absolutely no way. I wasn't really any good to anybody at that time. The ups and downs of dealing with cancer and how to deal with uncertainty. Most people are going to say, and most doctors will tell us, well, you know, it's a disease and your wife has passed 1 year, your wife has passed 2 years, now my wife has passed 3 years. The chances of her making it to this point is 1%. 1%. So in other words, approximately 99 out of 100 people diagnosed the same month are no longer with us. So pretty good odds for us. And when she had her recurrence, she said, I want to go directly to surgery. There were some risks with surgery, and we did have some complications from the surgery. She had aphasia. She had problems walking. And during the last 6 months or so, she had a couple more seizures, but they couldn't figure out why. She was placed on a different medication, and I'm happy to say that the people at NIH who do not get excited very often are actually excited because they say there's no swelling in the brain, and she was on Decadron, which is a steroid. And in case most of you, if you have asthma or something, you probably know prednisone, or the inhalers. Well, Decadron is a drug that is about 20 times more potent per milligram, and she was on 12 milligrams. And that really plays with your mind if you've never been on a steroid. So a lot of ups and downs through that, but she was on it for 6 weeks, and it took a 6-week taper from April till July of this year, just last month. So after that, we got an MRI, said no swelling. This is probably why she was having trouble walking, why she fell in the bathroom. And I'll tell you, in the last 8 months, she had broken a tooth from falling. It was just difficult to keep up with everything. She'd broken 2 ribs, as well as a lot of other things. But the Lord was with us that whole time. And I can honestly say that the Lord is still with us. Because when I prayed about giving this testimony, I said, I'm going to say an awful lot of stuff, and this testimony is going to seem almost surreal to people to do that. And even though I've sort of condensed it down, because there's a much longer version of that, I can say one thing, and that is that God is alive and well. And if you are a Christian, you need to proclaim him. And if you haven't brought anybody to Christ, and I'm speaking to the converted, then I believe that you haven't reached your full potential. Imagine if every Christian in church brought one person to Christ, and then they brought one person to Christ. Within a few years, we would have a world of 7 billion, 8 billion people who would do that. So I encourage you to do that. This is actually being filmed, so I encourage you to listen to it again as my testimony. Just really have one more thing to say. God does work in mysterious ways. When my wife was better in December 2010 and getting ready to come back to work, I was really bummed out that I hadn't been promoted or anything. And she goes, Dipak, I think the Lord wants you to be promoted to captain. We were both commanders. And I think he wants you to be promoted. And I said, well, the board meets in like 4 weeks. And I don't have my things to the board. I was ready to give up, basically. I'd been through a lot in a year, and she had been through a lot in a year. She goes, well, you'll never know unless you write a letter to the board and explain a little bit about what happened, and you need some senior officers, I had a lot of great senior officers who wrote letters of recommendation for me at the last minute, literally people coming in from overseas for conferences and things like that, actually brought letters to my house. And I was able to include them in a package. So when May of 2011 came around, on a Friday evening, it's usually when they post all the stuff after everybody's gone home, but you can still get it online. I went down and it said 06 captains or staff corps results. And I said, gosh, this is going to be bad. I said, I'm going to go look. My wife was actually downstairs And I looked and I said, I just, I want to see at least her name on there, which I knew she would, which I did. But then I saw my name on that list. And I said, I think God didn't feel the year before that I was ready to be promoted to captain, but the year after that, he felt that that I had made it through a crisis and had held up. And most people that I work with and all that will tell you that I'm a pretty even-keeled individual. What you see here is I really don't get bent out of shape too much, a little bit, but not too often. And I always ask for forgiveness for that. One thing is that when she had her initial seizure, I went to Proverbs 17:22, and it said, "A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a downcast spirit dries up the bones." And so when you think about that, you basically say that there's nothing I can do for my wife. In emails, which some of you have received, and I've told doctors very, very directly, I say, I thank you so much for the surgery. I thank you so much for the oncology. I thank you so much for everything, but you're not going to heal my wife. God is. And I wrote it in an email. I said, this is exactly what I tell people when I'm up to it. I said, I'm absolutely thank you that you are there for us, that God has used you to assist us. But ultimately, it will be God that determines our destiny. That's it. The Lord will determine our destiny, and that will be it. Whether anybody else in this room, my wife, myself. And not to be morbid, but I remember when we went in our first year of medical school, and after the first week we dissect cadavers, yes. After our first week in medical school, we were brought into two different groups so that they could, two psychologists could actually ask us how we feel about that, because it's a unusual feeling when you're dissecting a dead body. So he says, do you know the only difference between you and those people is time? I always remember that. I said, that's true. It's time. There's nobody in this room who will, that I know of, live beyond 80, 90, maybe 100 years, or maybe if you're lucky, you'll be one of the people like in Japan who lives to be 115. But I don't believe anybody in this room. So you have to pick and choose. And you guys have chosen to believe in Christ, and I have too. But there are a lot of people out there who haven't. There are a lot of people who will tell you and will say, look at the people that you've seen who have fallen. You've seen them on TV preachers and all that. I say, that's not Christianity. I said, if you don't mind if I use your book, I said, this is. Everyone in here has committed sin. Every one of us has been on a high, been on a low. People have sinned. I said, some people this happens to be the book they sinned out of. So my friends would always tell me, they go, well, why would I want to follow a religion that the people are sinning all the time and going into church and asking for forgiveness? I said, well, you can't look at it that way. You have to look at it that if it comes from your heart and not just, I'm going to go out and party next week again and ask for forgiveness again on Sunday, God will know your heart. He knows your heart. And I think this was brought up a couple weeks ago. So you better, if you're not straight with God, you need to be. Because when your time comes, just like mine, I would never know when, somebody is in church somewhere in this country today, and they will not be alive at the end of today. That I can guarantee you. They will be somebody, they'll be hit by a car, something will happen to them. And the first thing is are they right with God? So there should never be a time that you're not right with God. And there should never be a time, and I know the media, and I know a lot of people who try to squash us and try to say, let's just change the Bible was the latest thing I heard to include everybody. And I said, that doesn't work. The Bible was written thousands of years ago, and it doesn't work. And I just want to end here and I'll be happy to talk to anybody after the service. Where it got cut off here was John 14:12. It says, "In most solemn truth, I tell you that he who trusts in me, the things which I shall do also, and greater things that he shall do, because I'm going to the Father." So people ask me, how am I doing, and how's my wife doing? And I say, we're fine. This is in the Lord's hands. It doesn't mean that I don't get nervous sometimes. It doesn't mean that it is. We're human. But this is in the Lord's hands, as I've professed to everybody. And the Lord has done a darn good job for 3 years, considering we're in the 1%. He brought us here to Washington, D.C. when we needed to. He promoted us when we were supposed to be. He did an awful lot of stuff for us. He brought the prayer team from this place to do it. People came out of the woodworks to assist us. Lorraine's sister came down to assist us for 11 weeks from Philadelphia. So there was a lot. We have a lot of relatives on this side, a lot of family, military we know, great military institutions, great church. And we were helped in many, many ways. So I just wanted to end with that and give it back to Pastor Bill. I'm probably over my 20 minutes, I'm sure. But I just wanted to thank you all for that testimony. And the future, it's in the Lord's hands. Okay? God bless you.